Hey everyone, Mark Emond here from Demand Spring. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Lucy Zarlengo. Lucy, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Lucy, you're our CMO in residence. You're certainly no stranger to the role of the CMO. You've had CMO responsibilities at Employ, Bonterra, senior marketing leadership roles at Thomson Reuters, Dun& Bradstreet. There's been enough ink that's been spilt on the role of the CMO and how CMOs are feeling these days. That role is under more scrutiny than ever, smaller budgets, bigger expectations. AI is now playing a dramatic role in shifting things for CMOs. CMOs today, and I know I've lots of conversations with you and other CMOs who are feeling this way. They're being asked to do more with less. They've got a lot of priorities. I think they probably have the biggest span of control in terms of business priorities of any executive in today's modern organization across really any industry. They're being asked to drive both the top line, but then also play a key role in customer success and retention at the same time. Speed and experimentation is ever present for them. The role is evolving. I think as I look at the role of the CMO, we've had, a relatively steady state of increasing responsibilities and business practices that kind of reached maturity in the last like 20 years, but now AI is dramatically changing, all functional areas and certainly the role of the CMO. So really evolving the role of the CMO. And of course, ROI pressure is ever present for CMOs. So question for you to start off this discussion is, how do you lead through this change? If you're a CMO today and AI is something that you're undoubtedly looking at, and depending on your relationship as a CMO with AI, you're either maybe really trepidatious or you're really leaning into it. But how do you make it your competitive edge and not just another distraction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I both for myself and I have a pretty large network of senior marketing leaders as well as CMOs. I think you're absolutely right in terms of how you summed up the pressure that CMOs are facing right now. There is, so much span of responsibility. There is so much pressure on driving ROI, on marketing really to help drive growth within an organization. And in many cases, in a business environment that's maybe in flux. At the same time, a lot of pressure from the CFO and kind of the CEO and other executives in the organization. How do we do more with less? How do we reduce costs? How do we look at our expenses and make sure that we're right sizing? And then, yeah, at the same time, this pressure around AI in terms of there is a go do there. And I think for many CMOs, the question is like, what is the go do and how do you use it as a strategic lever? So how I really think about it is that this is really another tool in the tool belt that marketers have and senior marketing leaders have in terms of how can you use technology in order to drive greater impact for the business. And I think depending on the needs of your business, that could be you're leveraging AI in order to be more efficient. Your team has a need in order to deliver better outcomes for the business with more speed, right? Maybe there's a need where the market is evolving very quickly. You have a intense competitive pressure and you need to do things far more quickly potentially than you have in the past. I think though that there's also a piece of like, how can you leverage AI in terms of freeing up mindset of your team and have a competitive advantage where they are not doing as many manual tasks and they are really leveraging their time in terms of thinking through net new strategies, in terms of evolving their plans moving forward, maybe at a frequency or at a pace that they haven't had necessarily the potential to do in the past. And so I think it all depends on the organization, but I think for myself and for many people that I speak to, it's not just around tasks, right? How do you use AI to create content or to create a video or to come up with new messaging or whatever it is, but really how can you leverage AI to free up some time in order to then give you the mind space in order to think more strategically about your role as the CMO, whether that be, again, in terms of how do you partner with the customer's organization in terms of driving retention and expansion? How do you partner with the CRO in terms of scaling demand generation outcomes, et cetera?
Yeah, I really like the way you framed that, right? First of all, it being a tool, but it really being a gateway to kind of rethink the operating model within marketing, right? I
Yep.
think, and we see kind of two distinct segments of CMOs today. Those who are leading and who are visionary leaders and who get AI at a strategic level, And those who are seeing, maybe their employees take a little bit more of a lead, their marketing teams take a lead
Mm.
with experimentation, right? And I think the ones who understand it strategically understand that it's more than just looking at how to use AI to do, say, content atomization or content creation, right? It's really an opportunity because I think we've grown so much as B2B marketing organizations in the last 20 years. We've automated, we have created digitized processes. Analytics has definitely come a long way, but there are still a lot of challenges for marketers, B2B marketers. There's silos within marketing, let alone
Yeah.
across to our partners in sales or customer success. There's still way too much manual efforts in a lot of the business processes that we execute within marketing. So I think the visionary CMOs who are ahead of the curve are looking at how do we use AI as a means to break down some of the problems that exist today, to reshape our business processes where it makes sense, to look at how we gain greater efficiency, automating routine work, for example, simplifying bloated MarTech stacks,
Mhm.
to deliver personalization at scale, but still not lose that human touch and that authentic nature of communication. How do we help with enablement? Closing the AI skills gaps, I think, is one of the first things, and it's where we're seeing the most traction early on in the AI services we're delivering to clients is how do we get our employees curious, competent, and confident with AI? And that's where the magic starts to happen when they start to embrace it and we provide a strategic layer of guidance and a framework for what we want to accomplish. That's where we start to do really transformative things with AI. Alignment is a huge issue. I think
Mhm.
CMOs who are forward thinking when it comes to AI are looking at it as um, a set of both technologies, but also change management processes to better align marketing, sales, and customer service. Accountability is something that I think forward-looking CMOs are thinking about. How do we drive board-ready reporting to defend ROI? And I know there's been a lot in the news recently about the ROI of AI, and that's
Yep.
something that together I think AI vendors and also, executives have got to solve for to keep pushing forward with it and realize the potential of it. And then, how do we create a more resilient team and department? And, for myself as a CMO, how do I create a more resilient set of business processes, driving faster, cheaper, more measurable growth? Even at times that, markets today are a little uncertain with tariffs and trade issues and, economies that have gone up and down and CFOs that are spending less on marketing. So how do I create greater resilience? So a number of issues, but I'm curious to get your thoughts in kind of surveying, and I know you talk to CMOs a lot still, within your network. Are you seeing kind of this chasm between those who are kind of leading with AI and thinking strategically and those who maybe are running behind it a little bit? And there's a lot of experiments going on within their organization, but they're not necessarily creating that strategic framework. What advice do you have for those CMOs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I definitely see that. And I think first starting with the CMOs who are maybe, more forward thinking or maybe just like have a leg up in terms of they started some experimentation even themselves earlier on and now have really started to think about how do they bring more structure into their organization around AI. I think that, very much a few things that you mentioned are critically important to that is one, making sure that your team is enabled and really has the skills in order to then leverage AI as a technology or as a tool within the team. I think as well, the role of the CMO and really those who are more forward thinking or who have really kind of maybe really invested more than some of their peers, right now is thinking through an overarching strategic framework. And I want to talk about that in a little bit because I know, you have a perspective on that, but it's not
Mm.
just like experimentation. It has to be moved from experimentation in terms of how is AI now a part of your overall go-to-market strategy? How are you leveraging it from a process perspective? How are you changing overall workflows and how work is being done within your team? And in some cases, potentially, how are you restructuring different teams within your organization because of the technology through AI that is now available? So I think
Mhm.
for some of the CMOs that I know and other senior leaders who are maybe a little bit more ahead of some of their peers, they're already putting processes in place. They're already leveraging specific pieces of technology. And to your earlier point, looking at their MarTech stack to say, what do we actually need? And maybe start with, what technology already exists or what vendors are we already working with that have an AI component, and how do we start there?
Mhm.
I think where you have more like groundswell of team members who are doing AI experimentation, I think that's really a call to action for the CMO or the senior marketing leader to say, we have a lot of great interest within the organization, which is fantastic. And how do we harness that and
Right.
harness some of the experimentation that's being done to then think more holistically about, again, how we want to change our processes, our workflows, how this is going to impact our strategy, et cetera. And in some ways, it's wonderful for them because their team has already embraced the technology and is already interested and excited and engaged. And so it's really finding those folks in the organization who are influential to their peers, who are really interested in experimentation, but also have a mindset of then how do they bring scale to the organization and have it be maybe more structured, if that makes sense. And so, I've seen, just my personal experience when I was at Employ, we were kind of in the middle. I would say we had a lot of team members who were super excited and started to kind of do their own AI experimentation. But in all honesty, we also had folks who were not entirely clear on how AI could best leverage or be leveraged for their role, and maybe in some cases almost fearful of the impact of leveraging AI of on their role specifically. Right? Are we just gonna learn about AI? Are we going to be enabled through a specific program, or is the CMO going to put in place new processes because ultimately, she wants to eliminate my role, and that very much was not the case, right? So I think it's kind of like dual challenges. One is like the CMO leading from the top and really driving the strategy through and bringing their team along a journey of learning and enablement. The other is really harnessing folks who already are engaged, but also making sure that honestly, you don't have people going rogue, that they're, establishing new processes, et cetera, that maybe aren't, kind of operationalized through the organization. But I know, Demand Spring and you specifically have kind of a framework for how do you think about how do you drive success with AI. And I know this has also been based on a lot of the MarTech and other transformational work that you've done with CMOs and other senior marketing leaders in the past. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called the scale framework, and I'll define what that means. And I think at the heart of it, it is we talk a lot about AI governance, and usually when people talk about AI governance, they're talking about things like ethics and how you use it in a responsible manner. But I think a big part of AI governance, and I think this is probably a lot of the role of the CMO when it comes to it, is governing the energy around AI in the organization, right? So harnessing it, as you said, where a lot of energy exists, harnessing it in a strategic, structured way to, use human time and dollars in areas that make the most sense for an organization, customized to their needs. And also just harnessing where there's a lack of energy, trying to catalyze, the rest of the people and bring them along. And I think that's what I love what you did at Employ, Lucy, is you really harnessed the energy of the organization and you got it moving in the same direction. And then from there, just seeing how your team kind of took off and just started, all the light bulbs started going on with respect to how we could use it to enhance business processes within a governance process that were putting in place in terms of strategic guidance. So the scale framework really looks to do that. It's an acronym and it stands for a few key things, but ultimately what it represents is harnessing AI for strategic purposes to bring people along and business processes along, and then to scale it out and do so in a way that can show ROI and we can measure it, and then from there get the buy-in to continue growing it and having a real impact. So the S represents strategize. So we really want to start with, and this is, our advisory to CMOs is looking at AI through the lens of what are first of all, what are the business problems that exist today and the marketing priorities that you have today? And then how might you apply AI to those business problems, business opportunities, marketing priorities? So, we'll come in the scale part or the strategize part of scale and audit your readiness for AI. So, what technologies are you using today that may have AI in it? And are you using them? Are you not using them? How do they impact your marketing priorities? Where are there gaps and opportunities? And how do we align your AI priorities to your go-to-market strategy? So really that big kind of planning component first. Then we look at customization. So based on knowing what your priorities are and your readiness for AI, we then customize tools and technology, training, enablement, workflows, business processes to get the most out of AI, custom to your unique needs. What are your priorities? So that's the C. Then we look to automate. So, we've
Mhm.
looked at how do we customize, then we apply AI to look to drive repeatable, high volume efficiency of tasks that maybe are more manual today than they could or should be. From there, we look to launch and pilot responsibly, right? So look at, okay, what are our KPIs for piloting it? With what part of the organization? How will we govern and know when we're successful? And then how do we grow from there and embed AI into daily workflows? And then last is evaluate, right? We want to carefully, this is such a new area. We want to carefully calibrate, measure, and manage and optimize and iterate how we're using AI to drive success. So, this is a methodology that we believe, starts with looking at, the strategic priorities aligned to why you may want to use this technology, which is also really about change management, and then how you progressively use it to drive AI as a partner, not a replacement, but a partner
Yep.
for B2B marketers in what they're doing. Um, I know that we've used it. We started this with the work that you did at Employ, and then with many other organizations that we're working in right now. Curious to get your thoughts on it, and maybe any reactions to, how it's structured relative to what you saw as a CMO and how you approached implementing AI as a CMO.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was actually taking notes. I have like so many different thoughts. So one, I think like having a structured framework is so important when you think about, this is really it's change management, but it's significant change management. This is not just like, hey, some tweak that we want to make. We got a new MarTech tool or whatever it is that, maybe impacts some part of the organization. This can be transformational for not only an entire marketing team, but a company, a go-to-market organization, et cetera. I think like one thought is like this is great timing to think about a framework, going into 2026
Mhm.
planning and like annual planning. I think that it's a good point in time to think as you start to approach the end of the year of how can you go through a framework like this to really help inform the organization moving forward for next year, while at the same time there are probably some other kind of quick wins that you can put in place or processes that you can change more near term. I like what you mentioned around like responsibly piloting, because I do think sometimes it can be very easy to just go test a bunch of net new things, right? Especially because the technology is so and once you get enabled, it's relatively easy to use. It's like, easily available to the organization. And I think you can go off in so many different directions. And I think it goes back to like one, where is the business need of in terms of where do you want to apply AI, and then think through like how do we actually make sure that we can be successful as part of this. So do you have the resources in place? Do you have the processes in place? Does your team have an understanding of what we're trying to go do? And I think that like responsible piece is just really important in order to make sure that there's really, I think, some guidelines for the organization. um and then I think the piece, where you mentioned like the evaluate, I think that there's a need to consistently think through, and, each organization is different. Maybe it's on a quarterly basis, maybe it's more frequently or less, but thinking through and looking, how are we actually leveraging AI? What's been working as part of how we've driven change management with the organization? And that's not just from, are we seeing better business outcomes, but are we seeing the team actively engaged in the AI work that we're doing? Are we actually seeing the team become more adept at kind of the work that they're doing around AI? Is it being embraced in other parts of the organization? Can we help evangelize in other parts of the company potentially? I think that evaluate piece is just critically important. And I think the technology is going to continue to evolve and change. I think even, for myself or for any of us, it can be feel daunting to keep on top of like what is the latest and greatest in all of the technology and tools. And so that evaluate piece is really important. I would say from my experience, one of the things that I think all of us have to keep in mind is that at its core, when we are looking to drive AI success within our organization, again, this is a change management initiative. And this is a change management initiative that is at the scale of maybe much larger than any other change management that your team has gone through. Now, of course, if you've had an
Yeah.
acquisition or, new leadership brought in, there's many changes that go on within an organization, but this is fundamentally shifting how work is being done. And that brings a lot of feelings and emotions in a team. And again, I experience that with my team. I feel like I even experience that myself sometimes. You wonder like, is there going to be a CMO moving forward, or can
Mhm.
someone a CEO just use agents to figure out how to go run marketing, right? And I don't believe that, but that is like a fear that, you can easily start to kind of think through, especially, if you spend a lot of time in LinkedIn and other channels where there's just like, a lot of information or perspectives that I think are maybe meant to be more thought provoking is what I would say. But again, if this is a change management initiative, there's a lot of it that really starts with the people. And I think enabling and training and getting to the root of how the team is feeling about the changes that you're trying to drive, ensuring that they feel that they've been educated and they have the information that they need in order to be successful, and also understanding like any change takes time, right? You're not going to all of a sudden launch something or try something new and week one you're going to get amazing results. The team is going to fully embrace it. Like it's all of a sudden going to be working. It's like anything else in marketing, it's going to take some time, but I think especially it will take time for the team to kind of be brought along that journey. And specifically, my team worked with members of your organization, Mark, on a prompt training program. And I think that was a 12-week program. We started it at the beginning of this year, 2025. And the first few weeks, honestly, I was a little bit nervous. And I called up John on the team who was running the program. And I said, is this a normal, typical experience? Because I think in the first few weeks, we had a handful of people who very much were excited and trying out what they were being taught each week, and already kind of ahead of maybe some of the curriculum, you might say. And then we had others, I think, who were less engaged in kind of the learning sessions that we had. Maybe we're leveraging it more for thinking about how do they use the technology or the training for their personal lives and not their professional experiences. And it made me nervous. And we had a real conversation. And I actually brought in a member of the learning and development team from our HR organization to say, okay, if we want to acknowledge and accept that a huge piece of driving AI success is change management of our team and our people, how do we actually go do this in a way that is structured and is going to take into account kind of best practices? So some of it was knowing people are going to stumble at the beginning, and that's okay. And you have to give them the space for that. Some of that was saying, how can we acknowledge and really recognize folks who are leaning in and starting to see success? And then, how can we also kind of have those folks who are maybe some of the earlier adopters are really excited? How can we kind of the train the trainer methodology or an approach where they are, kind of sharing out what they're doing, showing some success of what they're doing, showing ideas of what they have to help spur ideas in other parts of the team or the organization. So, I know that there's a lot there, but I think at its core, again, to me, it's just, change management is critically
Yeah.
important. And you can't lose sight of that, especially, you are managing a team of human beings, and like change can be hard, and these are teams that likely through the last 2 years have gone through a lot of change in terms of post-pandemic and, kind of changes in the overall economic environment and things like that.
Yeah, you're so right. AI initiatives don't work without human buy-in, right?
Mhm.
And we've heard the stats where employees, a large percentage, not a majority, but a large percentage, much larger than you want, in some cases are torpedoing AI initiatives
Yep.
because of fear, right? So I love the approach you took at Employ to bring people recognize that people are in different parts of their journey emotionally with AI and in the process of change. That change can be threatening. Others are out in front, whereas some not as much. And how you looked at the leaders to bring along the people who were a little bit behind. So that is a huge barrier to AI success. There's been a lot that's been talked about, generally speaking, in terms of AI, the promise of AI, but also potential pitfalls of AI. There's lots of barriers. That's one of the bigger ones. What else? Any other thoughts or things you would share with CMOs in terms of barriers, how to acknowledge them, and tips for overcoming them?
Yeah, I mean, one that comes to mind is really, a lot of pressure from, if you're a senior marketing leader reporting into a CMO, from your CEO, from your board, right? There's a lot of pressure overall of, I think, within businesses and B2B today, of how do we leverage AI and how do we move as quickly as possible, right? And I think part of this is really CMOs having to take a step back and really educate senior leadership, their board, their CEOs, et cetera, in terms of, here's the overall strategy and approach. Here's how we are defining success. Here's how we are going to measure that success, and then, kind of iterate and optimize from there. So I think the scale approach that you talked about is not only foundational and fundamental in terms of change management within a marketing organization, but it then gives you the framework or the foundation to then have conversations outside of the marketing team of, here is how we are going to be leveraging AI, and really, hopefully with the goal of ensuring that peers and leaders within the organization, including the CEO, have an understanding of the AI strategy and approach, and that they buy into that. So I think, the first thing is really just this pressure that CMOs are facing, that it's on you to solve for that, right? And to help educate others in the organization. And that's like anything else within marketing. I think the second piece is, there's a lot of hype in the market. There are a lot of vendors promising a lot of things. And I think, this is where you have to do the due diligence and bring in the right members of your organization, whether that be your operations team, whomever that may be in the organization, to help advise and guide you on, looking past the hype. And again, going back to, like, what are the strategic initiatives that we are trying to drive? What is important to us as a marketing team, as a business, in terms of where we need to go improve and kind of invest there. I think it's very easy sometimes, marketers kind of love tools. We have, even though we never feel our budget is big enough, we generally have one of the biggest budgets within any part of an organization. And it's kind of the most flexibility within an organization. And so it can be easy to just, hear from a new vendor, latch on very quickly, and then all of a sudden you have this MarTech stack that is totally bloated, that no one can manage, that you're not actually optimized in terms of, like, best getting the ROI out of the tool investment that you have. So I think the second piece is just being judicious and asking a lot of questions, and don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions of either existing vendors or net new vendors that are approaching you, in terms of, like, where should you be investing more, right? And probably putting in place some type of roadmap or plan in terms of, like, scaling your investment over time, but also understanding as a CMO, you're going to have to figure out how to fund that. It's unlikely all of a sudden your MarTech budget is just going to grow because of this technology. In fact, the CFO is probably thinking your budget is going to go down because of AI, right? So I think that's the second piece. And then I think the third piece is, there's a lot in terms of just how the buyer journey is changing and evolving. And that's always the case, right? In terms of how content is being consumed by B2B buyers, in terms of the growing kind of buying committee in larger organizations. And I think there is, a real case for thinking through, like, what is your strategy for whatever you want to call it, like, Gen AI search, or, there's, like, 17 different names for that. But understanding that the buying journey is evolving, you have to think about how AI and, is a piece of that, and how people are consuming content. But at the same time, continuing to invest in the channels where you are seeing return. And so it's kind of this pilot model, in what you talked about, like responsible piloting, of, like, looking to understand how your buyers are actually changing in their overall journey of educating themselves and consuming content, but not fully walking away from the tried and true and what's been kind of giving you scale. And so that's going to be unique for any organization in terms of the mix of different channels and things like that. But it's also not going from one extreme to another where all of a sudden you stop investing in channels that have historically been working for you in order to then only
Sure.
invest in how do you make sure that you are being, showing up in ChatGPT results or whatever it may be.
Mhm. Yeah, I think responsibly piloting AI to me also means that you're starting with looking at very unique areas where there are either challenges or opportunities in your marketing operations. That could be funnel gaps, it could be productivity gaps. It could be, areas where you're looking to drive greater efficiency in your team or break down silos. I always worry when I see organizations moving forward with AI, because the priority is to cut costs.
Hmm.
I feel like that is going to happen naturally, but when you lead with what's a business problem other than cutting costs, what's a business problem, right? Pipeline performance in certain areas of the pipeline, efficiency, silos. You can apply AI in a manner that you're going to be able to apply it and measure it and see results in a much more successful manner than if you just look at AI as a tool to cut costs. So that would be the one barrier that I
Yep,
would acknowledge that I think CMOs need to kind of govern and lead. I think, the natural tendency maybe from CFOs is to look at it as how can you cut costs? And I
totally.
would reframe it as what are business problems that maybe have been plaguing us for a while or opportunities that we could apply AI against to drive business results and also look at the impact financially to the business.
Yep. I think that that's great advice.
So great conversation, Lucy. Any final words of advice? Any thoughts as you're talking to CMOs and you're hearing what they're struggling with AI? Any final thoughts come to mind from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is really an inflection point and a point in time for CMOs where this is a huge opportunity. And I think, it's an exciting point in time as well, like technology and changes there. Like this is something that marketers have always had to kind of evolve and grapple with as part of their career, right? There was a MarTech transformation. There's kind of various points in time where
Mhm.
all of a sudden technology has drastically changed either the buying journey, either how marketing is being executed, et cetera. And so I think, my guidance and advice is to see this as an opportunity. I also think it's important to remember, like, you don't have to do this alone, right? That you have peers within your network of people that you've built relationships with over the course of your career. There are agency partners such as Demand Spring. There are many different ways where you can make sure that you are, kind of getting insights from others who are learning along the way as well. And maybe some folks who are maybe further ahead of the journey that you're on. And so, don't feel like it's all on you to do the
Mm.
experimentation. This is why you have a team. I see a lot of that. So I think it's well, like lean into your network and kind of lean into those that you trust in order to help provide guidance and direction and really just kind of a gut check. And I think it's a great opportunity of like having coffee with some of your peers, whatever it may be, just to chat through, here's some ideas I have. Here's what I'm seeing with my team. What are you seeing? And really make sure that you can kind of learn from your broader network, because that's one of the great things about building a network and having those folks, as part of your overall kind of career experience.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. We prior to, AI really starting to take over much of our thought processes, 2, 3 years ago. We were 20 years into a MarTech marketing automation driven transformation. There was a ton of knowledge in-house in organizations about how you go about doing the things that we've been doing, account-based marketing, lead scoring, lead nurturing, intent. Um, Now there's so many questions, right?
Yeah.
That everyone has, inside organizations, outside organizations. Now is the time to zoom out, to talk to peers, to talk to others, right? The framework that we talked about, is really one where we look at how do you take a strategy first mindset? How do you think about team enablement? How do you look at proven frameworks? And how do you govern, using both your own expertise, but then leaning on others outside the organization who can help you? The role of the CMO is evolving clearly. today. I think with the right AI approach, it can be stronger, smarter, and more impactful than ever. And I'd love to as we continue to grow in this space as demand spring, and we talk to more and more CMOs, the feeling is that it's an area where the more that we lean on each other, the more
Yeah.
we're going to drive change in that strategic way, governed by, the right set of business priorities. So, I hope today's discussion was useful for our audience. Again, they've got lots of questions. We have lots of questions too. And the more that we talk through this and think through this and talk more with others, the more we learn as well. So, Lucy, thanks for your time today. Great conversation as always, and we'll talk again soon.